But I'd like to start out with just two small diversions from the program. One is why I'm here. I'm a board-certified OBGYN. I trained in Philadelphia, went to medical school, did my internship and residency in Philadelphia, and I have a practice in Bucks County. And about 7 years ago, during Lent, in a Bible study program, I was challenged by a Catholic priest about my practice of using contraception in my practice. And as a result of that, I was sent my very first encyclical that I was invited to read. Guess what the name was? Humani Vitae. I was sent a little audio tape in the mail, Janet Smith's Contraception, Why Not? And I was invited to my first NFP class, for which my wife accompanied me, and we are now certified NFP instructors. As a result of that experience, through the grace of God and the challenge of that priest, and hearts can be changed and minds can be changed, and I spent 25 years educated in and steeped in the need of women's health care, having contraception available and sterilization available, and now no longer do that. So I would challenge all of the women in this room to confront their physicians with the same prospect in the hopes that God will change their hearts. The second thing, when you're preparing for these things, you always have a lot of information, but this actually came up and struck me very odd that it would be 2 weeks before. This is from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and it's readers responding to a column January 28th of this year, written by an individual named Jonathan Last. Now, I didn't see the original article, but he is quoted as saying in his January 28th column, a picture so stark that it's horrifying, Jonathan Last said, abortion in many cases is simply a matter of adult women deciding that she doesn't want to be burdened with bearing a child that she has created. And I want to use this to show you that although all the intents and all of the needs to get rid of abortion in our culture are important, that underlying, as Dr. Haas had suggested in his talk, that contraception goes one step deeper to the root of abortion, because you wouldn't need to have an abortion if your contraceptive didn't fail, as far as the unwanted children is concerned. So to give you a little bit of a reflection of how this entire concept is approached in our society, I thought I'd pick two of the letters of response to give you a flavor of what kind of culture we're dealing with. The first is that the real tragedy is that a pregnancy occurred at all. This is the language that's being used by people now. Contraception must be the first line of defense. If that fails, early-term abortions are the second worst choice. We can't go back to the days of coat hangers and backroom disasters. Human nature won't change. We don't need the strong-arm tactics of people like Jonathan Last to make the issue a moral dilemma. So that was one of the letters. The second one that I'd like to share with you, and I'll paraphrase this, is from the president and CEO of the Guttmacher Institute in New York, which is an agency that is under Planned Parenthood, and they collect all the statistics, and in fact, some of the information that I'll be presenting you will be statistics directly from their information. And this is a female, a PhD, president and CEO of the Guttmacher Institute. Unfortunately, Jonathan Last did not find room for even one sentence mentioning that the scientific evidence clearly shows that the best way to reduce abortion is not to restrict it or ban it outright, but rather to make it less necessary by preventing unintended pregnancies in the first place. And then the final one, which I suppose is just a characteristic of people that live in New Hope, because I'm right down the river from New Hope, and this is not to disparage everyone that lives in New Hope, but this is another female, and she says that Jonathan Last is a hypocrite. The next time he eats a lamb chop, I want him to think of me. It's okay to murder or kill a lamb, but not okay to abort a fetus? In my opinion, the difference is semantics, because the end result is the same: a life is extinguished. Who is last to put a higher price on the Homo sapiens species? Because he believes himself to be superior to animals? Because the Bible says so? The next time he's at the zoo, he should enter the lion cage. He'll be their chop. Meat eaters who oppose abortion are hypocrites, because Homo sapiens can survive without eating meat, whereas lions can't. I like eating veal chops, so I'm not against abortion. So this is what we're kind of dealing with now, and I would point to you that the prospects of what we're dealing with now with contraception are not so subtle, and I hope to be able to use not so much moral evidence, but scientific evidence to show you that you don't even have to go anywhere near the word religion or morality to prove that these drugs and chemicals and devices are dangerous, and why women ever allow themselves to be subjected to using these and putting these things in their bodies now that I am where I am is totally beyond me. Let's see, how do you, what are we doing to advance this? Okay. We already, he's throwing money at me already. It's my honorarium. Let's see, 19 cents. I'm going to give you 25 cents worth. Okay. So we're going to do an overview and talk a little bit about the definition. You already heard the definition, but as I said, you're going to hear things repeated because I think it's important. I was going to take this out, but I decided to leave it in. I'm going to mention some philosophical issues because I think that they are important to add to the moral issues. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the extent of the problem that we're dealing with and some of the medical implications, and then hopefully wrap up, not that economics, it is a factor, but not that it's the most important factor, and then some conclusions. We already talked about the definition, contra being against, inception being the act of becoming pregnant. And I would point out to you that natural family planning, which I am not going to discuss during this other than to mention it in the context of its usage, and fertility awareness are not the same as contraception, although they can be used. The different types of contraception, we're going to predominantly be focusing on hormonal types of contraception because they are the most common used, but I will mention the IUD and barrier and spermicides and withdrawal, which is still being used, and they are all out there along with sterilization, and we'll try to get through as many of them as possible. What time do I have to?
45 minutes altogether, so
45 minutes. I got about 53 minutes worth of slides. If I put another...
if I put it... 55 minutes.
Oh, okay. So as Dr. Haas pointed out, God does not desire us to have unlimited numbers of children, but what we are called to in our response to our conjugal relationship and our covenantal relationship with each other is to be responsible parents, and those responsibilities in the order of which they are originally conceived are responsibilities to God, and then responsibilities of the spouses to each other, and then responsibilities to the family, and then ultimately the responsibility to society. And I would point out to you that they've been completely reversed. And now the priority is that we have a big responsibility, as Dr. Haas mentioned, with Paul Ehrlich and population explosions. And I will just point out to you that this year, in December, Germany is now offering money, and I think it comes out to about $13,000 American dollars a year for any family that will have a child because their population, their birth rate is so low that they are contracepting themselves out of existence. And this is ongoing in even some of the most Catholic countries in the world, including Italy, which has a birth rate of about 0.7. So they're estimating you need 2 children to be born to every 2 parents, and actually you need 2.1 to accommodate for miscarriages and pregnancy losses in order to have a zero population growth rate. And in the United States, we have a birth rate of about 2.1. So we are just about at zero population. But in Spain, it's 1.7, and in Italy, it's less than 1. they're estimating that within 50 years, there will be no natural-born Italians that are fertile to be able to generate any Italian children. So we do have a responsibility to society, but it's not reversed. The Catechism tells us that periodic continence or using methods of natural family planning do not violate the dictates of God's plan of life and love, and that will be discussed a little bit later. I also point out to you that with the institution of contraception, which has been around for 2,000 years, and a couple of other methods beside that which was spoken of by Dr. Haas, is that they would soak a sponge in vinegar and insert it into a woman's vagina, and that was the first combination barrier method with a spermicide, because vinegar is somewhat of a spermicide. And in camels, they used to put stones in the uterus of a camel for the long caravans across the desert to prevent them from becoming impregnated, and they were the first IUDs. So this goes back over 2,000 years, but if we already have a method of spacing births that's 98 to 99% effective and conforms with God's plan of life and love, then why do we need any other methods? And then the idea of what is implied by that article that I read to you is that the most serious side effect, in quotation marks, of natural family planning that's pointed out, people refer to it as a Vatican roulette, they refer to it as Catholic contraception. The side effects is a child, the supreme gift of a marriage. And those of you who have children, take a look around. I was having a conversation with someone before we came up today, and I was telling him about my wife being the youngest of 9, and he was saying that he has 6 in his family, and his mother used to say, yeah, I had all 6 boys using that rhythm method that worked so well. And I said, well, your response should have been, well, which one of us did you not want, Mom? And I'm sure her answer is, oh, I want all of you. So you can make a joke of it, but the point of the matter is that what we have is a process that violates the nature of the conjugal act, that's anti-life. But I think what's important when I read this is that contraception in and of itself is not a sexual act. It is actually an act of willing against a possible life, and someone not engaging in sex cannot contracept. And so there are issues that revolve around using some of the hormonal contraceptives at times for some medical conditions that may be appropriate if people are not sexually active. I'm not going to get into the specifics of all the exceptions, but I want you to know that contraception is a willing by the individuals who engage in that particular use of those products against that a life not exist, and therefore it is by definition contra life. What makes the act of contraception itself is the will of the acting people, not the products, not the devices, not the things that the methods that they're using. And so it's impossible for this act to ever not be contra life. And I also want to point out to you that you can incorrectly use natural family planning incorrectly as a contraceptive. So it's not always used in conformity. So even though you're following the dictates, the people have the intent of contracepting for the purposes of preventing life and still engaging in sexual activity and using it as a contraceptive, then it can be just as much of an evil as any of the other contraceptives. It's important for you to know that how contraceptives work. All of this that I'm going to tell you today is in every package insert of every hormonal contraceptive that's on the market in the United States today, and all you have to do is look in the package insert. You don't even have to go anywhere to find any of this. However, this is supposed to be an evidence-based medicine lecture, and so for those of you who are interested, I have 3 of these in my car, and this is just the tip of the iceberg of some of the evidence of medical articles that are in current literature in some of the best medical journals in the world that are speaking about what I'm about to tell you. And some of them will be noted on the slides that we're talking about. So 96% of the time, contraception works by preventing ovulation, and 2% of the time it interferes with sperm migration, and 1% it actually acts as an abortifacient and therefore kills or prevents implantation of an embryo. And for those of you who would like to access a very interesting booklet, there's a booklet out called Infant Homicides and Contraceptives. And it is published through the Secretary of the Study of Abortion Deaths Commission from Eternal Life in Bardstown, New York. And they're very inexpensive, but it will tell you an estimate of the calculated annual infant homicides of unborn babies in the United States of America from the effects of the abortifacient effects of contraception. So when you're going to the pro-life march in January of every year and you're hearing about 48 million abortions, you're hearing about 48 million surgical abortions. You are not hearing about the 600,000 medical abortions average every year from the over 10 million women that are using contraceptives, and multiply that times the 66 years that the pill's been on the market in the United States. And we're into the hundreds of millions of children that are not here because of contraception. So it's a much bigger problem than anyone could ever imagine, and they're just talking about the surgical abortions. Chris Callenborn's an internist from Altoona, Pennsylvania. He's probably done more research on breast cancer, and it's linked to abortion, and that's the name of his book. And a lot of the references are going to be coming out of his research and his articles. He had a great article. It was published in the Mayo Clinic Proceedings in October of '06. We'll be referring to that a little later. This is a little vignette of the extent of the problem, and these statistics are actually, I figure, why not go to the source of the enemy? These are from the Guttmacher Institute from last year. There are 62 million women in the United States who are in childbearing ages between 15 and 44. 43 million of them of reproductive age, that's 7 of 10, who are sexually active and do not wish to conceive, but could conceive. That eliminates those that are already pregnant, those that are breastfeeding, those that have infertility, those that are abstinent, those that are virgins, those that choose not to conceive. And so their attitude is that the typical woman in the United States only desires to have 2 children, hence our birth rate of 2.1. And in order to achieve those 2, she has to avoid, in their language, pregnancy for over 30 years of her childbearing life. And so that's the attitude and approach that the contraceptive mentality has toward looking at women and providing the statistical information. 98% of all women in the childbearing age have at some time or another used at least one method of contraception, and although the estimates vary, roughly the best that we can come up with is about 2% that are actually engaging in natural family planning. And so, although as I said I won't be mentioning that, I'll get into that a lot in detail, I will mention that downstairs there is a little flyer for a conference that's coming up in 2 weeks up at St. Mary Medical Center in Langhorne. And what we're going to try to do is put together a marketing program and an advertising program for marketing natural family planning in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And so those of you who can attend, we'd love to have your input and your ideas. We're going to have Judy Leonard, who's the director of the Family Life Office from Wichita, Kansas. Last year they had a very successful marketing program on natural family planning that included billboards and primetime TV spots and radio spots that significantly increased the awareness, and I think we just need to compete where everybody else is competing. So we have a majority of the 62 million who are currently using contraceptives, 31% who don't need them, and then 7% in their estimates from Guttmacher who are at risk of having an unwanted pregnancy but not using contraception, and that's the market that they're directing their activities at. Most women use reversible methods because they want to be able to maintain their childbearing potential and therefore use either the pill, which is the most common method, but the remaining males and females rely on sterilization. And this is some pretty amazing statistical information. Under the age of 30, the pill is the leading method, but over 35, sterilization is the leading method. There have been over 180 million sterilizations that have been performed worldwide. And in 2002 alone, there were 14 million people that were sterilized in our country. And so that actually ends up being just about the most common #1 operation that gynecologists do. And they're coming out with newer and newer methods all the time to be able to facilitate sterilization. The newest one right now is putting little spring clips through the uterus into the opening of the fallopian tube. And then the spring has tissue that grows into it and causes a scar that plugs the fallopian tube. And that's called the Essure, E-S-S-U-R-E, was just released on the market in October of '06, and the company that manufactures it's going around now doing the training procedures for the physicians, and one of the larger training facilities in the area is Abington Hospital, where they're doing all the training. They just happen to also, coincidentally or not, be the largest abortion provider in the city of Philadelphia at a hospital. So it's not to disparage Abington, but you'll be seeing some information about a prayer group that's coming up from the pro-life people next month. 50% of all women over the age of 40 have already been sterilized. That's half. Whereas only 18% of males get sterilized. And what I see when people are coming in, males don't want to have anything to do with it. They think it's going to change their nature. Okay? And there have been some reports about increased risks of prostate cancer, which have been kind of a little bit disputed. But there are the majority, and women, in order to be sterilized, have to undergo general anesthesia, and it's major abdominal surgery, and it's not 100% effective, and the failure rate is 4 out of 1,000, and it costs several thousands of dollars to go into the operating room for a half hour or 40 minutes to have these procedures done. And I'm not espousing one over the other, but males just have to have local anesthesia. So there's something about the female mystique and the female response to this contraceptive message in our culture that allows or permits or encourages women to accept this responsibility that they not only take all the pills and put in all the IUDs and use all the diaphragms and all the spermicides, but they are willing at a much higher percentage than men are to go out and have permanent sterilization and have their tubes tied. And some of the witchcraft, pharmakeia, or violation of the human body that John was talking about in his talk involves the mutilation of the human body. And a sterilization procedure is a mutilation of the human body. Now, this is some of what promotes the contraceptive mentality and culture. Your federal tax dollars, whether you agree with contraception or not, are paying for the insurance plans of all federal employees who are guaranteed by the federal government that they will have insurance coverage with a contraceptive rider to provide them with contraception. And of that, you get no choice. So whether you knew that or not, you know it now. In addition to that, several million women, 6.5 million and almost 2 million teenagers, receive contraceptive services from publicly funded clinics, the #1 provider in the world, and especially in the United States being Planned Parenthood. And 21 states have laws mandating insurances provide contraception. And that includes Catholic hospital systems, who are now fighting battles in New York and California that are going to the Supreme Court because they are trying to fight against the state mandating that they provide contraceptive coverage for their employees. So, in other words, ABC Catholic Hospital provides Blue Cross and Blue Shield to their employees with no contraceptive rider. If you're in a state that has a mandate, you have to provide contraception, even though it's against the teachings of the Catholic Church and against the mission of that hospital. It is required by the state, and they are stuck. Now, my response to that, as far as an answer, and I had a discussion with this about Cardinal Regali last year at a meeting of Catholic healthcare providers at St. John Noon Nursing Home up on Roosevelt Boulevard was that I think that the Catholic Church needs to institute its own insurance coverage plan. It's large enough, it's big enough, it has enough applicants. If you don't want to join, you don't have to buy your insurance from the church, but they have insurance coverage. You know, the Archdiocese of Philadelphia buys their insurance for their priests and their nuns and their employees from Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Philadelphia, IBC, Independence Blue Cross, the largest provider in the area. And they do sterilizations, they pay for abortions, and they provide contraceptive services. And the only thing they can do to opt out is not to provide the contraceptive riders. So we have an entire insidious development in our culture that just takes us down this path, and it's been growing over the last 70, 80 years. And we now have a situation where roughly, because we're not hearing about it from the pulpit and we're not discussing it from a moral point of view, and people are not willing to come out and stand up and say, no, this is a sin, this is wrong, from the moral issues, we now have 85% of Catholics contracepting and 37% of them being sterilized. It's the same numbers as in the secular society because they just don't think there's anything wrong with it. And priests don't want to get up in a pulpit on Sunday and give a message out there that says that ultimately they don't want to offend people that have already been sterilized and people that are already contracepting that are sitting in the congregation. The teenage choices are pretty much the same. 95% pick a choice based on how well it protects against pregnancy. So again, the teenagers are already getting the message. The first thing they hear when they walk into a doctor's office is, what are you using for birth control? Not how are you doing, not how is your health, not why are you here, but what are you using for birth control? Your teenage daughters can walk into Planned Parenthood. They don't need parental notification or parental permission, and they can get seen, get treated, and walk out with a prescription for any hormonal birth control product without your knowledge or without your consent, but they have to be 18 to get their ears pierced in the mall. They can walk into a Planned Parenthood and get an abortion without your consent in Pennsylvania, but they need to get your permission to get their ears pierced at the piercing pagoda in the mall. There's something wrong with the way we perceive these things. There's 1.5 million teenage pregnancies a year. There's 4 million sexually transmitted diseases a year. And the Adolescent Family Health Journal came out with an article. You don't see this on the front page of any of the newspapers, and you don't hear this on the news. Abstinence is the #1 factor that's responsible for declining pregnancy and birth rates. What they're suggesting is that the availability of contraception and information in pregnancy classes is responsible. And of course, abstinence is 100% effective in preventing sexually transmitted diseases, which cost this country $6.5 billion annually in health care to treat. Just some of the articles. Chris Callenborn, along with Joe Stanford from out in Utah, in the Annals of Pharmacotherapy, had an amazing article talking about the post-fertilization effects of the emergency contraceptive pill, and went into also discussing the oral contraceptive, hormonal contraceptives, and documented categorically, numerically, without any religious or moral implications, that there actually is an abortifacient effect from these products. And so it's a very interesting read, and it's out there in the journals. Westhoff and Wysocki in medical eligibility for contraception, they've actually had to develop a table. And this is what points to the issues with respect to the over-the-counter availability of emergency contraception, or what's referred to as the morning after pill. That anyone who has high blood pressure, diabetes, ischemic heart disease, stroke, any kind of valvular heart disease, a past history of breast cancer or ongoing cancer that they don't know is diagnosed, all have increased risk with taking the pill, and people are going to walk in and buy this over the counter and not even be diagnosed of half of these conditions and be using these products. So the World Health Organization actually came out with an article and developed guidelines for classifying the use in 2004 in the face of warning people how dangerous these products are when you have chronic healthcare conditions. Lancet is one of our biggest journals that most of the docs get. In '96, the largest collaborative group on breast cancer reviewed 54 epidemiologic studies, and the results are that there is an increased risk of breast cancer with the use of hormonal contraceptives, especially if you use them before your first full-term pregnancy, and that the increased risk before the age of 20 is 10 times what it would be. Now, if you plot it on a graph from 1960, the year the birth control pills came on the market, until 2007, the increased use of contraceptives, and you plot it on the same graph, the increased risk of breast cancer, the increased rates of breast cancer, and then you plot it on the same graph, which is downstairs on George's table, the divorce rate, you would see 3 lines that parallel one another all the way up from the bottom to the top. And so it's no small coincidence. They've put estrogen on the carcinogenic list in the United States. What is one of the hormones that are in birth control pills? Estrogen. Low dose, estrogen. It's a carcinogen. It increases your risk of breast cancer. It's in every package insert. It's in the literature. It's irrefutable. Health Magazine in 2002, a 26% increase in breast cancer secondary to hormonal contraceptives. Another article in Lancet, increased risk of cervical cancer associated with hormonal contraceptives. Why? Number 1 sexually transmitted disease in the United States today is no longer chlamydia, it's human papillomavirus. Causes cervical cancer. Increased risk in earlier age of first intercourse, women that smoke, women that take birth control pills have more frequent sex with more frequent multiple partners, so they have an increased risk of cervical cancer, and the rates go up symmetrically with the use of the pill and the increase in frequency of sex with different partners. So we have not wiped out and done anything with pap smears as far as cervical cancer is concerned, and now it's getting worse. And then Callenborn did an overview, which was the most extensive review in all the literature in '05, and showed that there is definitely a relationship and an increased risk, not only between hormonal contraceptives and breast cancer, but also between abortion and breast cancer. And what do the hormonal contraceptives do 1% of the time? Create abortions. So these women are increasing their risk not only based on taking estrogen, but they're unknowingly aborting pregnancies at an alarming rate. The World Health Organization in 2001 also has pointed out that there's an increased risk of heart attack, stroke, blood clots, and phlebitis, an increased risk of gallbladder disease, an increased risk of benign liver tumors, which can rupture and lead to death, and the mortality rates. Now, this is not the morbidity rate. This is not the complication. This is the mortality rate, documented, okay? The number of people that die from complications of hormonal contraceptives is anywhere from 0.3 to 1.9 women per 100,000 users. And this is between the ages of 15 and 19. These are not older women, 43, 45, and 48. Teenagers that die from complications every year. And they'll say, oh, well, it's only 30 to 190. Only. Perfectly normal, healthy children, in my estimation, dying from complications of a drug that is legal and given out and sold and people take it, all for the purposes of not wanting to have the effects. And I would have to say that I agree with John and say that all the people who use contraception really want it good. But what they want is they want the good pleasure of sex without the responsibility and the consequences. And what I would project to you is that they're not only killing their bodies, but they're killing their souls. And so we need to try to reverse this in a big-time way. The federal government, as I mentioned, placed estrogen on the carcinogenic list in 2000. The World Health Organization has classified both birth control pills and hormonal replacement therapy as carcinogens in July of '05. We had an article last January in the New England Journal of Medicine, again showing an increased risk of breast cancer. And then in October of this past year, with Callen-Borden's review, 21 of 23 worldwide epidemiologic studies dating from the 1980s, all documenting an increased risk of breast cancer with pill users, especially if you take it before your first full-term pregnancy. Now, what's the big deal about that? When you get pregnant, now, I know this is a God thing, and I'm leading from science into religion, but God created science, and so there is no conflict between science and religion, okay? What does pregnancy do to your breast? It matures your milk ducts and your milk glands from a type 2 to a type 3 and type 4 so that you can breastfeed. And that breastfeeding and that maturation decreases a woman's risk of breast cancer. And you'll see that published and talked about. Women who have a baby before they're 30 years old have a decreased risk of breast cancer. So all you women, go out and have a baby before you're 30. And if you can, breastfeed for at least 6 months to a year. And you'll decrease your risk of breast cancer. So the converse is true. If you interrupt the pregnancy at 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks before that maturation process takes place, well, then you increase your risk of breast cancer because you never got to the mature lobules, the stage 3 and stage 4. And the same is also true if you never get pregnant and you're taking the hormones. Your breasts are not mature enough to be able to withstand and hold off the breast cancer, so you have an increased risk as well. All documented in the literature. Of course, nobody ever talked about it when I was in a residency or in medical school because most of the articles and most of the information are paid for by drug companies. This is a list of a bunch of other articles, all showing increases of breast cancer related to the pill, all again from Callen-Borden's book. I won't bore you with all the details. 24% increase in women who are currently taking the pill now. If you stop, the effect doesn't wear off for 5 to 10 years. So you'll eventually get down to a zero baseline and have a normal rate 5 to 10 years after you've stopped the pill. So just stopping the pill doesn't get rid of the effect. 144% increase in women over the age of 45, and they're espousing that now to manage menopausal symptoms. Low-dose pill. Health, and this is all out of the 3rd European Breast Conference. You don't hear a lot of that, evaluating 103,000 women. All again documented in the literature. Now, some numbers, again from this book. If there are roughly 10 million users of birth control pills, and they're average somewhere between 600,000 and 3 million medical abortions annually, because the breakthrough ovulation rate, remember, is 2% on the average, because 2% of the time women ovulate. And that would give you about 200,000 ovulatory cycles, and at a pregnancy rate of 25% per cycle, you're going to end up with at least 50,000 chemical abortions per cycle, or 600,000 for the 12 cycles that a woman might have per year as the low estimate, and maybe as high as 3 million as the high estimate. And this is all this is on the outside cover of this book. I mean, this book is just, and it goes through every one of the types of contraception. If you have HPV, the virus that causes cervical cancer, and you use the pill for 10 years, you increase your risk of cervical cancer by over 150%. And women are coming and say, oh yeah, I need my pap smear, oh, and give me my pill. Isn't there something a little bit converse about that? Like, I want my pap smear to find out if I have cervical cancer. Oh, and now I want that new vaccine that prevents cervical cancer. Oh, but give me my prescription for my birth control pill so I can go have sex with my non-married partner that I'm not married to, who happens to be my 5th partner in my lifetime. Because by age 24, do you know what the average number of partners 24-year-olds have now in the United States? That's the average. Like I have to ask these questions now because it's part of the health care intake history, and it just blows me away when people have to sit there and go, so how many partners have you had? And they sit there, and this is like 19-year-old, and they go like, 7 or 8. I'm not, 8. I mean, it's amazing. how it's changed our culture and our society. Psychologically, I'll get into that a little bit more a little later, but depression, anxiety, fatigue, neurotic symptoms, sexual disturbances, compulsion, anger, negative menstrual effects, all psychological responses to the practice of contraception. They're not related to the hormones. They're not related to the method. They're related to the concept of contracepting, because you're going against your nature. You're going against the good. And since it's ingrained within us to do good and avoid evil, when you're going against the good, there's a certain amount of psychological damage that occurs. And when women come in, and the amount of medications and drugs that women are requesting and seeking as anti-anxiety and antidepressant agents is just overwhelming compared to what it was 30 years ago. It's just absolutely overwhelming. They don't want to deal with an issue. They just want a drug to make it better so that I can continue to function. Royal College of Family Practice, 46,000 women over 25 years, a 30% increase in depression. Oxford study, 17,000 women over 8 years, a 4 times increased rate of suicide, just in diaphragm users. So it doesn't have anything to do with the hormones or an IUD. That's just in diaphragm users, women that are using barrier methods. Another 10,000 women in a Walnut Creek study, 3 times more likely for accidents and suicides. There's an increased rate of prematurity, low birth weight, there's an increase in multiple pregnancies, there's an increase in infertility, because there's an increase in sexually transmitted diseases, and because this happens, and because this happens, they go for IVF and assisted reproductive technology, and because of that, this happens and that happens. Talk about a slippery slope from the top to the bottom. And we are almost, but not quite at the bottom of the slope. And we've been dealing with this just majoritively in this country since 1960. Nutritionally, decreased levels of multiple vitamins, symptoms associated with vitamin deficiency, weakness, lethargy, dizziness, skin irritations, increased susceptibility to infections, accentuated effects of caffeine. So if you drink Starbucks, and you drink Wawa and Dunkin' Donuts, and you like your caffeine in the morning, and you're taking your pill, and you're nervous and you can't sleep, so you want to go to your doctor and you say, give me an anti-anxiety agent and give me a sleeping pill. Geez, quit your pills and cut down on the caffeine and take your vitamins and live a good life and have some balance. Duh. No, just give me a pill. I won't get into the details with clotting factors that are increased, but VTE is venous thromboembolic disease. There are blood clots and strokes, and you can see the increase from 0.4 per 10,000 to 1.5 per 10,000. I will point out to you that with the contraceptive, how many people in here in the last 3 or 4 months have seen an ad on TV for the contraceptive patch? The patch? Did you notice that they disappeared? Yeah. You want to know why? 19 deaths in 4 years in women between the ages of 19 and 29, all from blood clots to the lungs called pulmonary emboli, class action suit out of California against Ortho Pharmaceuticals, not off the market, didn't withdraw it like Merck had to do with Vioxx because of heart attack because you're taking an arthritis medicine and you're 83. 19-year-olds in California. Her father instituted a class action suit, and they're signing people up now, but they haven't removed it from the market. You know what they found out? 60% greater absorption of estrogen than they originally had thought in the studies through the skin because it bypasses the liver than they had originally thought. 60%. So you know what the FDA did? Black box warning, October of 2005. And just put the 60% in the black box warning, and you have to get the package insert, and you have to read it, because your doctor's not going to tell you about it. And they're still prescribing it, and people are still wearing them. And it's not off the market. So we have increased risk of blood pressure, blood clots, heart attack, as I mentioned, liver tumors, gallbladder disease, and then that's been updated now. It's been 4 years, so this is from last year. Medical costs, we talked about with the sexually transmitted diseases, a significant number of billions of dollars. Federal funding to Planned Parenthood every year. Your tax dollars go to fund Title 10 and Title 20 funds. As far as the pharmaceutical companies are concerned, if it costs $30 a pack, and they're really like $50 a pack now, and you use them every month for 12 months, and you multiply it out times 10 million women, you're making a couple of $1 billion a year. And couples who inadvertently conceive a child, the most likely backup is abortion. So it's contraception leads to abortion, not the other way around. So that's the backup. And if you do an abortion, and there's 1.3 million abortions every year, and you charge $300 in a clinic, that's without anesthesia. But if you want anesthesia, it might cost you $2,000 to go into an OR and get anesthesia. You're running into the $3.9 billion plus. Big money, big industry, big business. From the Government Accounting Office, the government spends 10 times as much to promote contraception as they do on abstinence education. There are 3 federal programs for abstinence. There are 25 federal programs promoting contraception. Our tax dollars at work. So, there's one other aspect of this, and I'll wrap up here, that I wanted to run by you. I know that this is a lot of information to absorb as a scientific presentation, but the information really is out there. But there is an almost insidious and somewhat ignorant movement to not educate physicians about both sides. I never heard word one about any of this, ever. I have 6 partners who contracept. When I give them these articles, they laugh at me. I said, what are you laughing at? It doesn't say on the bottom, like I have the articles, it doesn't say on the bottom that this was funded by a pharmaceutical company, like the articles that you're going to show me that say no breast cancer risk. I said, so what are you laughing at? Well, that Mayo Clinic proceedings, nobody reads that. That's not an OBGYN. Show me an article from the Journal of OBGYN. So I do. And I get them that article, and I give them that. I said, well, here it is there. Wow, that was 3 years ago. Like, how new do you want it? It's because people have to change behavior, and because they don't want to change, and because they're going to have to make them question their lifestyle and what they do and how they do it. And so part of it is ignorance, and I can't use that as the excuse. I actually consciously did make the decision, although I didn't know about these medical side effects. But now that I do, as a female healthcare provider, I cannot in good conscience go to work every day and see 25 or 30 people and turn around and be handing this stuff out and telling people to do this stuff. And women really need to know the truth. You know, the amazing thing, I only practice with women. I don't see men. I like women better, okay? And they're really smart people. You know, I mean, if you can have a baby, you got to be pretty tough and you got to be pretty smart. And I don't know if I could ever have a baby. And if I did, it would probably be the last one, and humankind would probably go down the chute if men had to have children. And that's all biblical too, but I won't go there. And, but we're not educated to know this, and we need to do that. But women need to say no also. And you have to understand that your body is a gift, and we're all going to be called to respond to that. So it's a double-edged sword. So we need to educate the culture and society. Everything that we do passes by way of our families. And our most important foundation to keep safe is the family. It's the building block of society. And we have a technology now that can expand things very rapidly, and the forces of evil spread extremely quickly throughout the world. And so it's time to end our culture of death and convert over to a culture of life. We physicians have been damaged, and I have a lot of personal issues to deal with for all the sterilizations that I did and all the birth control pills that I gave out for a really long period of time. And thank God I have my faith, and the Bishop was talking about it in his homily this morning at Mass, that, you know, faith is extremely important to us, and I know that I can be forgiven, but I still have to, we all have to try to fix this. We have to try to make this better. Because if we don't, I mean, our own healthcare system that is supposed to be protecting people is damaging people because of these things. Our fertility is not a disease, and we treat it like it's a disease, and we abuse it. And I think that physicians are the key to stopping this, and I think that we have to step up and take the responsibility, and I think that you need to challenge your doctors in every way, at every aspect, not just OBGYN, but in every specialty. So it's not so subtle. As I said in the beginning, it's intrinsically evil. And instead of birth control, how about if we all try a little self-control? And maybe that'll help a little bit.